On One at One Live today, meet a church planter who had a Hindu priest that started coming to their church, and hear how the conflict really rose as that Hindu priest wanted to start teaching his teachings to that new church. But hear the story of how God was victorious and well, let me not spoil it for you. That's all to come in today's One at One Live. Don't forget to subscribe or like our page. That way you'll get notified every time we have a new story, or each Tuesday as we publish a new One at One Live during the fall of this year. Make sure and check right down here the subscribe button or the like button. Click the notification bell and then you'll know. All right, get ready, because here we go with our next One at One Live. Welcome to One at One Live. I'm Bobby Gilstrap with the New Work Foundation, and we are delighted today to have joining us our one church planter at 1 o'clock and telling his story. And today we're glad to have Bill Johnson joining us. Bill planted Reach the Nations Community Church back in 2012. And so, Bill, we're glad to have you joining us today.
Thanks, Bobby. It's good to be here.
Well, Bill, I want you to tell those of our folks that are watching today a little bit about the context of your church, because your church is a little different than just going down the street and just planting to just everybody in the neighborhood. Your neighborhood's pretty broad. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like in your community.
The name says it all. We try to be true to that, Reach the Nations Community Church. So I'm serving in Clarkston, Georgia. And Clarkston is one of the most ethnically diverse square miles in the country. There's about 76 languages spoken in the high school, if you can imagine that. And so at our church, we are very multi-ethnic and multilingual. There's a lot of dynamics to that, Bobby. We obviously have different services at different times. We have different Bible studies at different times. We sing in several languages when we come together for Lord's Supper, which we've always done since we planted. All the groups have come together every time we have the Lord's Supper. It's a little picture of heaven. And so we're singing in different languages. We're having different speakers give their context, but yeah, it's a pretty phenomenal place.
Yeah, it's so diverse. And my wife and I have come and visited with your congregation, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. Very, very different than what you might experience in another type of a church plant or church. I want you to tell me, and those who are watching today, maybe one of the most unusual things that may have happened since you've been planting Reach the Nations Church.
Sure. You know, like I've always said, we've got a lot of unusual when you're doing multi-ethnic. You know, when I think of unusual, just, you know, in the day-to-day, our potlucks are pretty unusual, Bobby. You know, you might have fish with eyeballs, you know. So we have things like that going on. Everybody's bringing their cultural food, but at the same time, you know, when I think of unusual in terms of church planting, I'm also thinking of the type of people that we're reaching into. Now, I remember it was several years ago, we were doing some work among some of the Nepali speakers, and we had some house groups going on from people that had migrated from, well, they'd come from the refugees from Nepal. And we were in the home of what I came to learn was a Hindu priest, and his family had a few weeks earlier accepted the Lord. So we were doing some Bible study and follow up with them, and he didn't like that. So he would, he'd stir up some trouble, and, you know, he after we taught, he'd want to sit down and teach about his God and his deities and things like that. But he would try to start kicking us out and telling us not to do that anymore. And we would just pray. And when we would start praying, the most unusual things would happen to this guy. He would either end up in the hospital, or he would lose something that had to do with his immigration. It was always when we started praying, things like that would happen. And that would point him to us, actually. And we would start praying for his health. We'd start praying that God would have mercy and show him goodness and favor, and God would do that. And so it was like this cat and mouse game. It would go back and forth with him because he would get reprimanded, I think, from the temple for us being there. He would kick us out. He would do something, and we would pray for him, and he would get in some kind of trouble and go back. And, you know, I've been in a lot of American churches, but that's not the norm. And, you know, eventually he had some other priests that came with him. And I ended up, I remember one evening sitting on the floor with a Hindu priest and just opening the Bible, sharing the gospel, relating to him about his suffering and about what he'd been through. And this guy ended up accepting the Lord, you know. And when, you know, we think about the testimonies of the people in our congregation, we have these unusual stories, but they're God glorifying.
Yeah, what a great story. And so many of our folks that have been supportive of our New Ark Foundation. We have the little tagline, resourcing new churches for healthy beginnings. And that's exactly what they have been doing, not even knowing that you had this incident that was going on, this spiritual warfare, you could say, with this Hindu priest. I want to, before we jump forward, I want to tie a couple of things together, but I want you to unpack your potluck a little bit more. You mentioned the eyeballs at the potluck, but what are some other interesting things that may have happened at a potluck with folks? Because you have folks from all over the world in your congregation. So what kind of things do they typically bring sometimes?
So, man, I've had everything from squid. Of course, we have the fish with the eyeballs. There's a lot of goat that gets brought in. I told one of our African guys one time, you know, hey, you know, Americans, we don't grow up eating goat. And so it's almost like he was ashamed of that he had brought it in the past. So he told me, he's like, what about beef? And I was like, yeah, we eat beef. And so the next time he served beef, well, let me say this, it was part of the cow. I wouldn't go so far as to call it beef. I think it was part of the stomach or something, but because it came from the cow, it was beef, you know. And it's really funny. We meet at a community center, and there's this guy there. His name is Donnie. He's like the custodian or whatever, older guy. And I invited him to come one time. The Pakistanis were doing lunch that day, and they usually fix something spicy, curry, you know, something like that. So he said, hey, I think I'll join you today. So he comes back there after service. He's got a plate, and I'm noticing the guy's just kind of like walking around looking at the food, you know, and kind of checking things out. And then he comes over to me. He says, Pastor Bill, he said, I just remember, no kidding, this is a true story. He said, I just remember I think my wife is cooking some fried chicken today, and I think she wants me home for that. And so he wasn't having anything to do with it. He wanted fried chicken. And I'll be honest with you, Bobby, ministering to the people that I minister to and going to church and eating the potlucks every now and then in Clarkston, I just want a piece of fried chicken. You know, that's all I want sometimes. But anyway, yeah, the potlucks are pretty interesting. But it's you know, it's culture, and it's a beautiful thing, you know, so I love it.
Let's kind of take a right turn for a moment, Bill. What's one of your maybe favorite quotes, and tell me why?
Yeah, so when I think about church planning and I think about missions and what we do, there's one quote that I read it years ago. It just constantly stands in my mind. It's a quote that was given by Theodore Roosevelt, when he was giving a speech. It's called "The Man in the Arena," and he said this. He said, "It's not the critic that counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, and who comes up short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And man, that's a loaded quote there. And I love that quote because, you know, when you're planning a church, you're always under-resourced in some way. You never have the people in the beginning that you need. You know, the service doesn't always look like, you know, it will in 10 years. And there's always going to be somebody looking from the outside, especially in a multi-ethnic church. We deal with so many dynamics that people don't understand. They don't understand how hard it is to cross cultures, Bobby, with communication, with the gospel, with expressions of worship. So we have a lot of people that will come from the outside in and say, you know, you should do it like this, and this is how we do it back home. This is how we do it. And I appreciate the constructive criticism. We really do. But church planning, it is a bloody spiritual battle. And one of the things I appreciate so much about this quote is that you have to remember what you're gaining out of the experience, not so much being on the outside criticizing, looking in and saying, you know, well, maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that, when you've already tried it. And you've been there 1,000 times, you've failed 1,000 times. You have people that will come by your side for a little while, but they're not actually in the work. And when you fail, you don't see them again, but you know you got to keep pressing on. And I think what this quote reminds me of is the credibility of someone that's in the fight, you know, and the experience and the reward that you get from staying in the fight, and knowing that, listen, I would rather be in that fight. I would rather be the boots on the ground, right? And fail and succeed and fail and get up again and get up again, but see the successes and see the Lord use that for his glory than be on the outside. And that's why, you know, I love that quote. I think about it a lot.
You talked about the spiritual battle, the spiritual warfare that occurs, and the significance of that in a multicultural type of a setting is even heightened. Tell me about a recent opportunity you had to baptize somebody who is in the midst of that kind of spiritual turmoil, that spiritual battle, that you saw God came out with the victory once again in the midst of your church planting experience.
Yeah, there are several people that come to mind when I think of that. But you know, one of the people I think about most, it's a young lady named Riziki. Riziki's in her 20s, single mother, refugee from I think Tanzania, came from Tanzania. But you know, one of the most difficult things that we face is, I guess, what Christianity represents in other countries and how it's portrayed, what's expected. There's a lot of unlearning, you know, that we have to do before we can get to a pure, simple gospel with people that we're working with, because of what they've heard, because of what they've been taught in the past. There's a lot of spiritual warfare. You ask anybody that comes from Africa and that lives there even now, you hear the most bizarre stories about witchcraft and about people doing things and the spiritual warfare that goes around in that. And so there was a young lady we just began praying for. She was having some sickness, and a lot of this sickness they believed to have been linked to some kind of witchcraft back home. And but we started praying for her, and she ended up coming to the Lord. And in a pure and simple, with a pure and simple gospel, we baptized her. And I have seen this young lady go from a place of neediness, a place of not having anything to offer, to a young lady who is being filled with the Holy Spirit, that is growing in her walk with Christ, and is now accepting a call to missions herself. And not just a call to just go sharing the gospel. She is ready to go back to her country and begin sharing the gospel with people she knows have never heard it, don't know the truth of it. But she's coming to some of the trainings that we're doing. We have somebody else in our congregation that's discipling her. But when I think of that, it gives me so much encouragement, because it's not only that we've baptized somebody that's come out of a dark place, but we've actually seen this person transform into a laborer for Christ. And it's not somebody that just sits on a pew, but has really God's really done a work in her life. I'm really excited about what we're going to see from her in the coming season.
Bill, that is such a great example of really what the name of the church is: Reach the Nations. Someone who was in a very different kind of a setting than what many of our churches here in Georgia particularly, but even across a lot of other parts of the United States understand. Let me ask you kind of a general question. You not only are planting the church there and are pastor of Reach the Nations, but you've been working with Stone Mountain Baptist Association for a number of years now, helping other churches, particularly ethnic churches, to get started and reach their communities, that kind of thing. Tell me what really excites you about church planting.
Yeah. I think, Bobby, what excites me about church planting and ethnic church planting, it's certainly not the potlucks, I can tell you that. But it would, if I had to boil it down, I think church planting gives us the freedom to do exactly what we feel God is leading a group of people to do. I've served in other churches, and we have churches that are very blessed. They're giving churches. God is working there. But what church planting does, as opposed to having an established church, if God wants to take something in a different direction, or he wants to do something new, sometimes those changes take a lot of time to be implemented into an existing structure. And let's face it, God never changes. We know that. But our culture, we're at a place in this time in history where our culture is constantly reinventing itself. Our culture is changing constantly. And so to keep up with that, we're having to reach every generation a different way. And church planting gives us that freedom to start something new that doesn't have to look traditional. There's nothing wrong with looking traditional. But if we need to not have a Sunday morning service, and we need to meet at a different time for the sake of who we're reaching, church planting gives us that opportunity. Working with the different cultures, I think what's exciting about that is, we're at a place now where we want to see the gospel go back to other countries. And one thing that you learn when you're planning a church, you start with the end vision in mind. And when God is putting something in your heart, and you can foresee and envision, not exactly how you're going to get there, not every step, because things change. But when you can start with that vision in mind and have a freedom, a free platform to work from, it's an amazing thing to plant a church. It's hard, it's difficult, but there's a lot of freedom that comes with that in terms of being able to do what you need to do from the start, and set a direction and a course to reach the people you're trying to reach.
One of the exciting things about the kind of work that we do as a foundation is because we are resourcing new churches to help them get good, healthy beginnings. And Reach the Nations has been the beneficiary of people who have been donors across the years in various times. Most recently, not too long ago, we were able to help the church purchase a van to be able to pick up people to, get them to church and various meetings or whatever the need might be. When someone is talking to you and you have the opportunity to talk about the support that you've received as a church from the New Work Foundation, what do you tell them? How do you describe what we do and the importance of what we do?
Like I said earlier, when you're planning a church, you constantly feel under-resourced. Everybody wants to say, well, there's simpler ways to do church, but believe me, we probably do it as simple as anybody. But ministry takes money. Ministry takes resources. We would not be here were it not for the New Work Foundation. We're working in a very, very low income community, almost the lowest of the low. You're working with immigrants that have just gotten off a boat, and we're trying to reach them with the gospel. A lot of them at the time, they have no job, and when they get a job, you're also dealing with family structures where we've got several families in our church that have upwards of 10 children. And so, to provide for a family like that does not leave you a lot of wealth to give to a church. And so because of those dynamics, I'd be willing to say probably 80% of our congregation does not have access to transportation. I say access, they don't have access to personal transportation. So, when the foundation provided us a grant this past year to help us get something that was going to help us get our people to the church, number one, it made our services so much better, but we're not just using that van as a transport to take people from church to, or from home to church. Bobby, we've taken 2 mission trips since we've had that bus. And because of that, you'd be surprised how many of our congregation have never been outside of DeKalb County, because how are they going to get there, And so, listen, because of what the foundation has done for us, providing startup funds, helping us to pay rent, but then also helping us have access to a tool that is going to help us disciple people and give people a bigger vision for what ministry is. It's been incredible. Through that very grant, like I say, we've been able to take 2 mission trips that our own people have gone on. We've established 2 new partnerships because of that. So we're making the most use of it. And when I think about the New Work Foundation, I don't know that everybody that gives knows in full what the foundation is able to do. And so I encourage people give to the foundation. Church planters are some of the most they're entrepreneurs, in the faith. And wow, we need the support, but God is using church planters to disciple people, to create pathways to reaching new generations of people. And we couldn't do it without you, no questions asked.
That's exciting to hear, because Reach the Nations is just one of 59 churches that we've been able to help in our existence a little over 31 years now. In fact, this is quite interesting, Bill. You guys have baptized a number of people, but of all the people that we know of, that we don't have records of everybody, but of all the people that we know of that have been baptized in those churches that we have helped to resource, for every $725 that someone has given, an individual has given, that's resulted in one of those baptisms.
That's
So
incredible.
you hate to try to just boil it down to numbers, but that's a pretty exciting number,
It's
to be
very
able
exciting.
to say $725 actually has resulted in a baptism throughout the history of our resourcing new churches. So, Bill, we're going to wrap up, and I want you to have one final chance to be able to speak to our One at One live viewers. And what would you say to them? What would you like to wrap up to encourage them about supporting church planting, about Reach the Nations Church, whatever it is, just a wide open opportunity to speak to our viewers?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I would say thank you for watching and giving a little bit of time to this, to hear the stories of church planters, to hear what church planting's doing, to get behind the foundation and see what supporting the foundation helps guys like us do. But God is doing so much through church planting. Like I say, we started with the end vision in mind, and in the ethnic world, because of the foundation's help. You know, I can't speak for everybody. I know that at Reach the Nations, we have, not only in our own congregation, but we have sent workers back to their home countries, and we have been a part of engaging other unreached people groups back home where the gospel is not present. I know that out of our church plan, if you count all of the global work that we've done, Reach the Nations has been a part of planting about 15 other church plants all around the world. And we want to do that. We try to do that indigenously by sending people back, sending people to their own cultures here. And so God is doing some incredible things, I know, through our church, other church plants that you support. And so I'm not telling everybody to leave an existing church and go join a church plant. That's not my message. You need to be where God needs you to be and wants you to be. However, support church planting and support what the foundation's doing. So thanks for tuning in.
Bill, thank you for joining us. This has been so exciting. I could talk to you for hours about all the things that God has done in the work that's going on there at Reach the Nations as you continue to minister there. Thank you from our One at One live viewers and from our New Work Foundation. We are proud and thankful to be able to be a part of supporting your work, just like many other churches and churches to come. So that wraps it up for today. I'm Bobby Gilstrap for the New Work Foundation. We are so glad that you have joined us today and hope you'll join us again at our next One at One live broadcast next Tuesday.